The lobby was a strange mix of sleek metal walls and organic, glowing vines that pulsed faintly like veins carrying luminescent blood. Jackson Cole dropped his travel bag at his feet, letting out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It had been a grueling trip. 3 transfers, a near miss with a collapsing wormhole, and now he was here, standing in the middle of a hotel on a planet whose name he couldn't even pronounce. All he wanted was a quiet room, a warm meal, and maybe enough peace to figure out why he'd even taken this freelance contract in the first place. As he stepped toward the reception desk, his gaze flicked to a figure cleaning the glass entryway. She was hard to miss. Light purple skin with a soft, almost iridescent sheen, hair that cascaded like molten silver, and a curvaceous frame accentuated by her snug uniform. For a cleaner, she was unnervingly beautiful, and Jackson found himself doing a double take. She caught his glance, smiled warmly, and waved as if she knew him. "Welcome back, darling," she called out, her voice melodic and teasing. Jackson blinked, certain he'd misheard. "Excuse me?" The woman set down her cleaning tool and approached him with a surprising amount of familiarity, her eyes sparkling, with a mix of joy and mischief. "Don't play coy. You're late, but I'll forgive you this time." "Late?" He frowned, shifting his bag to his other hand. "I think you got the wrong guy." "Oh, Jackson." She sighed dramatically, placing a hand on her hip. "Still pretending you don't remember me? How charming." His heart skipped a beat at the sound of his name. "How do you know my name?" Instead of answering, she closed the distance between them and tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You really don't remember, do you? They said this might happen." "Who said what might happen?" He took a step back, suddenly on edge. The woman's expression softened, and she reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve. "I'm Saria, your wife." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He froze, staring at her as if she just claimed to be the queen of the galaxy. "My what?" "Your wife," she repeated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "We've been married for 2 cycles now. Well, in your human years, that's about—" "Stop," he interrupted, holding up a hand. "I don't know what kind of scam this is, but I just got here. I've never seen you before in my life." Saria's expression shifted to one of mild annoyance. "Oh, you humans and your stubborn logic, fine. Let's get you checked in first. Maybe that'll jog your memory." Before he could protest, she grabbed his bag and started toward the reception desk, leaving him no choice but to follow. The clerk, a bored-looking humanoid with translucent skin, barely glanced up as Saria placed the bag on the counter. "Room 227 for Mr. Cole," Saria said with authority. The clerk tapped on a screen, their translucent fingers glowing faintly as they moved. "Confirmed. Welcome back, Mr. Cole." "Back?" Jackson echoed, incredulous. "I've never been here before." The clerk shrugged, handing him a keycard. "Records indicate you've stayed with us before. Enjoy your stay." Jackson turned to Saria, his temper flaring. "All right, what the hell is going on here?" She gave him a disarming smile. "Why don't we discuss it in your room? It's a long story, and you look like you could use a drink." Against his better judgment, he followed her to the elevator, his mind racing. This had to be some elaborate scheme. Maybe she was working with the hotel staff to scam unsuspecting travelers. Or maybe, he hated even thinking it, he'd been here before and somehow forgotten. The elevator ride was painfully silent, save for the faint hum of machinery. Saria stood close, her scent faintly floral and oddly calming. He kept glancing at her, trying to make sense of her presence. She didn't seem threatening, but there was something about her that unsettled him. When they reached his room, she swiped the keycard and pushed the door open. The interior was sleek and minimalist, with a large window offering a view of the planet's twin moons. "Make yourself comfortable," Saria said, gesturing to the couch. "I'll get us something to drink." Jackson hesitated but finally sat down, his eyes never leaving her as she moved to the kitchenette. Her movements were graceful, almost hypnotic, and he found himself wondering against his will if she was telling the truth. She returned with 2 glasses of a sparkling blue liquid and handed one to him. "It's safe," she assured him when he hesitated. Trust me. He snorted. Trust you? I don't even know you. Her smile faltered for the first time, and she sat down beside him, her gaze searching his face. You do know me, Jackson. Maybe not in the way you remember, but we're connected. I wouldn't lie about this. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was crazy, but something in her eyes gave him pause. There was an honesty there, a vulnerability that didn't fit with the idea of her being a con artist. This doesn't make any sense, he muttered, taking a cautious sip of the drink. It was sweet and refreshing, with a faint aftertaste he couldn't place. Why would I forget something like this? Saria looked away, her expression pained. Because that's how the program works. It's complicated. What program? She met his gaze, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite name. I'll explain everything, but first, you need to remember who we are to each other. Otherwise, none of this will matter. Jackson leaned back, the weight of her words sinking in. He didn't know what to believe, but one thing was certain. This wasn't going to be the simple, uneventful trip he'd planned. Jackson stared at the liquid in his glass, swirling it absent-mindedly as Saria's words echoed in his mind. The program. It sounded ominous, like something out of a bad holodrama. His instincts told him to get up, walk out of the room, and never look back, but his curiosity held him in place. There was something about Saria, something beneath her strange claim, that he couldn't ignore. Start talking, he said finally, his voice sharper than he intended. What's this program you keep mentioning, and why the hell do you think I'm your husband? Saria set her glass down on the low table in front of them and leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees. Her silver hair caught the soft glow of the room's ambient lighting, making her look almost ethereal. For a moment, she seemed to hesitate, as if weighing how much to reveal. Then she sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. It's called the Soul Match Initiative, she began. It's a project designed to create meaningful connections between species that wouldn't normally interact on such a personal level. The idea is to break down barriers, foster understanding, and she paused, her lips quirking into a faint smile, and maybe create a little love along the way. Jackson snorted. That's a hell of a sales pitch. What does that have to do with me? You were selected, she said simply, by the program's algorithm. Out of thousands of candidates, you were chosen as the perfect match for me. He stared at her, dumbfounded. You're kidding. I'm not, she said, her tone earnest. The algorithm is extremely advanced. It analyzes everything. Your personality, your preferences, even your genetic compatibility. It's not wrong, Jackson. We're meant to be together. He barked out a laugh, the sound harsh in the quiet room. So what? Some computer decided I'd make a great husband for you, and now you're here to… What? Convince me to fall. In love with you? Saria flinched at his tone but held his gaze. I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm here because I believe in this. Because I believe in us. Us. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The moons hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow over the alien landscape. There is no us. I don't even know you. But you could, she said softly. He turned to find her watching him, her expression open and vulnerable. That's the point, Jackson. We have a chance to build something incredible if you'd just… No. He cut her off, shaking his head. This is insane. I didn't sign up for some cosmic dating experiment. You did, she said quietly. You just don't remember. He froze. What are you talking about? Saria stood, her movements slow and deliberate. She crossed the room to stand in front of him, her gaze unwavering. The program isn't just about matchmaking. It's also about protecting its participants. When you were selected, you were given the option to have your memories temporarily suppressed. You agreed, Jackson. That's impossible, said, his voice barely above a whisper. I would never agree to something like that. You did, she insisted, and I know why. You were scared. You'd been hurt before, and the idea of opening yourself up to someone like me, someone so different, it terrified you. So, you chose to forget. His chest tightened, a strange mix of anger and confusion bubbling up inside him. Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that I don't remember any of it. How am I supposed to trust you when I don't even know if you're telling the truth? Because I have proof. She reached into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out a small device no larger than a credit chip. She handed it to him, her fingers brushing his as she did. This contains your consent record, your voice, your signature. It's all there. Play it if you don't believe me. Jackson stared at the device in his hand, the weight of it far heavier than it should have been. Part of him wanted to throw it across the room to deny everything and walk away. But another part, the part that couldn't shake the sincerity in Sarya's eyes, compelled him to press the activation button. The device beeped softly, and a holographic projection flickered to life above it. A recorded image of himself appeared, looking tired but resolute. "My name is Jackson Cole," the hologram began. "I, of sound mind and body, consent to participate in the Soul Match initiative. I understand the risks and the terms of the program, including the temporary suppression of specific memories to ensure an unbiased experience." Jackson's blood ran cold. The voice was his, the words were his. There was no denying it. The recording continued, detailing more of the program's parameters, but Jackson couldn't focus. He stared at the hologram, his mind racing. How could he have agreed to something like this, and why? When the recording ended, the hologram vanished, leaving the room in silence. Jackson looked at Sarya, his throat dry. "Why are you doing this? Why go through all this trouble for someone who doesn't even remember you?" "Because I know you," she said simply. "I know the man you are, the man you can be, and I'm not giving up on you, Jackson. Not now, not ever." Her words hit him harder than he expected, and for the first time since arriving at the hotel, he felt a sliver of doubt. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe there was more to this than he could see. But even as he considered it, a nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered that nothing about this was as simple as it seemed. The weight of the moment hung in the air, thick with the unspoken truths that neither of them seemed ready to fully address. Jackson clenched his fists, feeling the urge to fight back against the growing sense of uncertainty gnawing at him. This couldn't be real. Couldn't be. He had to be trapped in some kind of bizarre simulation or hoax. But everything about Sarya, from the sincerity in her eyes to the desperate warmth in her voice, made it harder to deny. "I still don't get it," he said, his voice hoarse. "Why me? Why was I chosen, and why would I ever agree to have my memories erased? That doesn't make any sense." Sarya's gaze softened, and she took a step closer, her presence like a constant calming pressure against his spiraling thoughts. "You were chosen because the program knew you were ready, even if you didn't believe it. You'd been hurt before, betrayed by someone you loved. You were closed off, afraid to take a chance. The program saw the potential in you, Jackson. It knew that with time you could find happiness again. With me." The sincerity in her words left him momentarily speechless. He didn't want to admit it, but something in him, the part of him that hadn't been completely shut off by fear, wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe that there was a chance for something real. But how could he? He didn't know this woman. Didn't know if he was even capable of trusting her, or anyone again. He opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of a loud bang from the hallway interrupted him. Both of them turned toward the door in unison, the moment of intimacy shattered by the sudden intrusion. Sarya's expression immediately hardened, a flicker of alarm passing through her features. "That wasn't supposed to happen," she muttered under her breath. But before Jackson could ask, she was already moving toward the door, her hand reaching for a hidden compartment beside it. The faint click of a lock disengaging was followed by the door swinging open. Standing in the doorway was a tall figure, clad in sleek black armor with a strange, intricate design etched into the surface. Their face was concealed behind a reflective visor, but the presence was unmistakable. Intimidating, almost otherworldly. The air between them thickened as they locked eyes with Saria, their stance rigid and militaristic. "You've broken protocol," the armored figure said, their voice cold and emotionless, though there was an undercurrent of frustration. "You were instructed to remain on your designated mission, not to interfere." Saria's jaw clenched, her entire body going tense. "You're wrong," she replied, her voice low but filled with an edge of defiance. "This isn't what you think. This is my mission. I'm doing exactly what I was sent here to do." The armored figure didn't flinch. "Then you've gone rogue. You know the consequences for that." Jackson's mind raced, trying to catch up with the sudden change in atmosphere. "What's going on? Who are you?" The figure's gaze shifted to him, and for the first time they seemed to acknowledge his presence. "You're the one they're trying to manipulate," they said, their tone dripping with disdain. "You're the human who's part of the program, the one who's been made to forget everything." Jackson's heart skipped a beat, and the EIG's room seemed to tilt dangerously. What? What are you talking about?" Before the armored figure could respond, Saria stepped in front of Jackson, her body stiff and protective. "No, you're not taking him. Not now. Not after everything we've been through." The tension in the room thickened, a palpable force crackling between the three of them. Jackson's thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion. Who was this new figure? Why did they seem to know so much about him? And why was Saria so determined? To protect him? The armored figure raised a hand as if to signal for calm. "I don't want him. I want you to come with me. You've broken your contract, Saria. You know what that means." Her eyes flashed with something akin to fury, her posture unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere. Not without him." The armored figure's hand dropped slowly, and there was a brief, almost imperceptible shift in the air. Jackson's pulse quickened, the sense of danger creeping in. He had no idea who these people were or what they wanted, but he knew one thing for certain. Things had escalated far beyond anything he'd expected when he'd first arrived at this hotel. Saria seemed to sense his unease and glanced over her shoulder, her expression softening ever so slightly as she spoke to him in a low voice. "Whatever you're thinking, don't trust them. They're not here to help you. They're here to take everything." He took a hesitant step toward her, his mind still spinning. "Who are they? What's going on?" Saria turned fully to face him, her voice steady but urgent. "I'll explain everything, Jackson. Just trust me. Don't let them take you." The armored figure's stance shifted again, clearly growing impatient. "You're making a mistake, Saria. We'll give you one last chance to comply. Come with us now, or we'll be forced to act." Jackson's gaze flicked between the two of them. The tension between Saria and the armored figure was palpable, and every instinct in him screamed that he needed to make a decision, fast. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This was a standoff, a fight he hadn't signed up for, but one that had found its way to his doorstep. His eyes locked with Saria's, and for a fleeting moment, he saw the desperation there, the vulnerability. He'd seen earlier, the one that had made him question everything, was gone now. In its place was something else, a fierce determination, a will to protect him at all costs. It was enough to push him forward, to make him believe in her, just for a moment. "I'm with you," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around him. Saria's expression softened, a fleeting look of relief crossing her face, but it was quickly replaced by something darker as she turned back to the armored figure, her voice sharp. "Then you'd better get ready for a fight." The armored figure's posture didn't change, but a shift in the air made Jackson's skin prickle with tension. The silence between them stretched long, suffocating. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Whatever Saria was involved in, it was deeper and more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. And now, whether he was ready or not, he was in it too. The armored figure spoke again, their tone cold and unwavering. You've made a grave mistake, human. The consequences won't be so simple. This mission isn't just about you. You're a part of something far bigger, something you can't begin to understand. Jackson took a step forward, his mind racing with questions, but he refused to. Let the fear control him. He was done running from things he couldn't control. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to happen on their terms. It was his turn to decide. Then explain it to me, he said, keeping his voice as steady as he could manage. Why am I involved in this? What's the real purpose of the program? And why do you care so much about Saria? The armored figure's shoulders stiffened, as if Jackson had crossed some invisible line. You're an idiot if you think you can simply walk away from this. You'll learn soon enough that the program doesn't forgive those who defy it. Saria's hand shot out, grabbing Jackson's arm and pulling him back toward the center of the room. Her grip was strong, her expression fierce. I told you to trust me, she whispered urgently, her breath warm against his ear. And now we don't have much time. Jackson's heart thudded in his chest as the armored figure advanced, closing the distance between them with deliberate, methodical steps. There was something unnerving about the way they moved, so precise, so unyielding. Jackson could almost feel the weight of their presence pressing down on him like a physical force. Get out of our way, Saria said, her voice low but sharp, her stance defensive. We're not going with you. For a brief, terrifying moment, Jackson thought the figure might respond with violence, but instead, the armored figure paused, their visor flickering as if calculating something. Very well, they said, the words carrying a chilling finality. You've made your choice. In the next heartbeat, the figure moved faster than Jackson could react, reaching out to grab Saria's arm. But before they could make contact, Saria's hand flashed out in a blur, and the figure recoiled as if struck by an unseen force. A deep hiss of air escaped from their helmet, and they stumbled back, caught off guard. What the hell was that? Jackson gasped, staring at Saria in shock. Saria's eyes were blazing, her posture still unwavering. That, she said softly, was me doing everything I can to protect us. The figure straightened, their movements slower now, more deliberate. You're a fool, Saria. You think you can stop this? That you can protect him? You don't have the strength to defy the program. I don't need strength, she said with a quiet, lethal confidence. I have something far more powerful than that. Jackson didn't understand what was happening, but the sense of danger was undeniable. He knew they couldn't keep this standoff going for much longer. Something had to give. He grabbed Saria's wrist, pulling her back toward the exit. We can't stay here. Whatever they're after, we're not going to get any answers by sitting around waiting for them to attack. Saria hesitated for just a moment, then nodded sharply, understanding. Right. She didn't need any further convincing. In one swift motion, she drew a small device from her belt and activated it. The room flickered for a split second, and suddenly, the walls seemed to warp around them, the lighting dimming, the air shifting as if reality itself was bending. What did you just do? Jackson breathed, his heart racing. I created a temporal buffer, Saria replied, her voice cool but strained. It'll buy us a few minutes. We can't outrun them physically, but we can outsmart them. Jackson's mind was still reeling from the revelation that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't about an alien matchmaking program, or some strange cosmic twist of fate. This was bigger, darker, and now they were caught in the middle of something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. I still don't get it, he muttered, stepping back from the rippling walls. Why would they go so far just to stop us? What's the point? Saria's face softened, but her eyes were still clouded with urgency. The program isn't just about love. It's about control. It's about using people like us, people they've manipulated, altered, chosen, to fulfill their objectives. You're not just part of some dating experiment, Jackson. You're part of a larger plan. And they'll stop at nothing to make sure you don't interfere. His stomach tightened. What do they want from me? You're the key, Saria said, her voice low and intense. You were chosen because you have the ability to change everything. and they can't afford to let that happen. Before Jackson could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway outside, growing louder with each passing second. Saria turned to face him, her expression set with determination. "We need to move, now." Jackson didn't hesitate. Together they sprinted toward the door, the hum of the temporal buffer keeping them safe for the moment, but only for a short time. The armored figure wouldn't give up easily, and soon they would have to face whatever twisted reality the program had prepared for them. As they rushed down the hallway, Jackson couldn't help but feel the weight of the choices ahead. The mystery of his erased memories, the secrets behind the program, the truth of Saria's involvement, all of it felt like a storm gathering on the horizon, ready to consume them both. But one thing was clear. There was no going back now. The hallways of the hotel were eerily silent, the soft hum of the temporal buffer, the only sound that accompanied their hurried footsteps. Jackson's heart pounded in his chest as they sprinted down the corridor, Saria leading the way with practiced precision. Every corner they turned seemed to stretch on longer than the last, like the building itself was trying to trap them. The weight of the situation, of everything Saria had told him, settled heavily on his shoulders, threatening to crush him with its implications. "How much longer until it wears off?" Jackson gasped, his breath ragged as he struggled to keep up with Saria's relentless pace. "Not much longer," she replied, her voice steady, though he could hear the urgency beneath it. "The buffer's only temporary. We need to get to the docking bay. There's a ship there that can get us off planet. From there, we can figure out how to stop them." "Stop who?" Jackson shot back. "The program. Who's really behind all this?" Saria didn't answer right away. She turned sharply down another corridor, and Jackson followed her, barely keeping up as the adrenaline coursed through him. Her silence was a reminder that there were too many questions left unanswered. They weren't just running from danger. They were running towards something they didn't fully understand. But for now, he had only one certainty. They were in this together, and that was all that mattered. The stars outside the viewport stretched out before them like a vast, endless ocean, the cold darkness of space surrounding them on all sides. Jackson couldn't help but stare at the swirling constellations, feeling a strange sense of awe, mixed with the gnawing uncertainty gnawing at his gut. He was flying through the unknown, propelled by nothing but the need to escape, and the growing realization that everything he'd known up until this point had been a lie. Saria was silent beside him, her eyes fixed on the navigation screen, her fingers moving with practiced ease over the controls. The tension between them was thick, heavy. She hadn't said much since they left the hotel, and Jackson didn't know whether it was the danger they were in or something deeper, a part of her she hadn't shared yet. "Are we safe?" Jackson finally asked, his voice quieter than he intended. He couldn't keep the doubt out of his words. There were still so many things he didn't understand, so many gaps in the story. Saria glanced at him, her gaze cool but unreadable. "For now, yes, but we're not safe for long. The program's reach is vast, and they'll be coming for us. No matter where we go, they'll find us." Jackson swallowed, feeling the weight of her words sink in. "Then what the hell are we supposed to do?" "We survive," she replied, simply. "We stay one step ahead, and we take them down before they can do the same to us." Jackson turned his attention back to the controls, his hand still unsteady as he guided the ship further into the void. He wasn't sure he was ready for whatever was coming next, but one thing was certain. He couldn't let Saria face this alone. A sudden beep from the console jolted him from his thoughts, and his eyes snapped to the screen. The coordinates Saria had given him were glowing bright red, and there was something else. Something in the distance, approaching fast. A ship, a large one, closing in on them at an alarming speed. "Not good," Jackson muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. "Trying to alter their course. We've got company." Saria's head whipped around, her face hardening with resolve. "Brace yourself, they won't stop until we're dead." The ship's engines whined as Jackson pushed it to its limits, the stars outside blurring. into streaks of light. He didn't have much time to think. The ship following them was bigger, more advanced, probably another one of those agents' ships. But this time, it wasn't just 2 agents. It was a whole damn fleet. "Can you fight back?" Jackson asked. His voice strained as he banked the ship hard to the left, narrowly avoiding a blast that streaked past them like a flash of lightning. "I'll do what I can," Saria replied, her eyes narrowing in concentration. She flicked a switch on her side, and a low hum filled the cockpit. Jackson didn't have time to ask what she was doing before another volley of energy blasts hit the shields, causing the ship to lurch violently. The impact sent him slamming back into his seat, his head spinning as the ship rocked. Saria cursed under her breath, her fingers moving swiftly across the console. "We need to shake them off. If we don't, we'll never make it to the rendezvous point." Jackson gritted his teeth, trying to focus as the ship bounced through space. The feeling of being hunted, of being the prey in this endless chase, made his blood run cold. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. "I'm going to try something," Saria said suddenly, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Hold on." Before Jackson could respond, she slammed a series of buttons in quick succession, and the ship surged forward, its engines glowing brighter than before. The stars outside seemed to stretch as the ship accelerated, pushing its engines to the limit. But the pursuing fleet was relentless, closing in like a swarm of insects. "Faster," Jackson urged, his grip tightening on the console. "We can't outrun them forever." "We don't need to outrun them," Saria said, her lips curling into a determined smile. "We just need to buy enough time." A low hum filled the ship as Saria initiated a sequence of rapid maneuvers, a series of tight turns and sudden drops that threw Jackson against his harness. The pursuing ships followed, but their reactions were slower, less precise. Saria knew what she was doing. She had a plan, even if Jackson didn't fully understand it yet. A flicker of blue light flashed on the edge of his vision, and Jackson's heart skipped a beat. A massive explosion lit up the space behind them, sending shockwaves through the ship's hull. The pursuing fleet had hit something powerful. Saria didn't flinch. She kept her hands steady on the controls, steering them through the debris as the remaining ship scattered in confusion. It was chaos, but it was their chance. "Go, go, go!" Jackson shouted, feeling the adrenaline rush flood his veins. They had an opening, but it wouldn't last long. With a final surge, Jackson pushed the ship forward, the engines roaring as they broke free of the debris field. The stars outside seemed to open up into an endless void, and for a brief moment, it felt like they were truly free. "Are we clear?" he asked, his voice ragged with the relief flooding through him. Saria's face was grim as she checked the scanners. "For now, but we're not out of the woods yet. They'll regroup, and when they do, we need to be ready." Jackson let out a shaky breath, his pulse still racing. How do we stop them? How do we even begin to fight back against something like this? Saria met his gaze, her eyes fierce and full of determination. "We don't stop. We fight. We find the people who can help us, and we burn their entire system down." It was a simple answer, but Jackson could feel the weight of it. He wasn't just involved in something bigger than himself now. He was in the fight of his life, and with Saria by his side, he wasn't going to back down. As the ship soared through the stars, Jackson couldn't help but feel the fire of something inside him ignite, an unshakable resolve to see this through, whatever it took. The ship's engines hummed steadily, but the silence in the cockpit was deafening. Jackson sat at the controls, his eyes fixed on the navigation screen, scanning for any sign of pursuit. Despite the relative calm after their escape, a gnawing anxiety tugged at him. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot. Saria was silent beside him, her focus sharp, her eyes flicking back and forth between the readings on the dashboard. He had learned that silence from her wasn't a sign of defeat. It was the calm before the storm. She was always thinking, always calculating. And right now, Jackson couldn't help but wonder just how far she was willing to go to stop the program. how far he was willing to go. "So who exactly are these people?" he asked, breaking the silence. "The program? You said they were responsible for this mess." Sarya glanced at him briefly, her expression unreadable. She hadn't answered many of his questions directly. Not yet, anyway. "The program isn't just a group," she finally said, her voice low. "It's an organization with roots going back thousands of years. They control systems, technology, politics. They've been in the shadows for longer than you can imagine. Their reach is everywhere. And what they want, it's power, absolute power." Jackson frowned, trying to digest the enormity of her words. "And you're going up against them? Alone?" Sarya's lips curled into a wry smile. "I wasn't alone. Not when I had you." Her voice softened. "But I won't pretend this is easy. I've fought them before, unsuccessfully. The last time I was close, but I lost everything. Now I'm not just fighting for survival. I'm fighting for answers." Jackson didn't respond immediately. He had only known her for a short time, but in those few days, Sarya had become something of an enigma to him. An ally, a protector, and perhaps a friend. But there was still so much he didn't know about her, about who she really was beneath the tough exterior. "What happens when we find them?" he asked, his voice steady despite the unease stirring inside him. "What's the plan then?" Sarya's gaze shifted to the stars outside the viewport, her expression hardening. "We burn it all down." The intensity in her words caught Jackson off guard. The weight of her resolve was palpable. She wasn't just talking about stopping the program. She was talking about obliterating it. Before he could ask more, the ship shuddered, throwing him off balance. The control panel flashed a warning, an incoming ship fast and closing in. Jackson's heart skipped a beat. "Brace yourself," Sarya shouted, her hand slamming against a button, activating the ship's shields. Jackson's pulse raced as the ship jolted violently, the alarms blaring in his ears. He barely had time to react before the attacking ship unleashed a barrage of energy blasts. The ship's hull rattled under the impact, and Jackson had to fight to keep his hands steady. On the controls, "Who the hell is this?" Jackson muttered, gritting his teeth as he maneuvered the ship through a series of evasive turns, the black void outside flashing as the blasts narrowly missed them. "More of them," Sarya said, her voice calm, even though she was clearly preparing for a fight. "They're trying to finish the job." Jackson's mind raced. He wasn't ready for this. He didn't even know how to fight back against something like this. "What do we do?" Sarya leaned over, her hands moving swiftly across the console as she activated a series of countermeasures. "Hold on. I'm going to need you to help me with this." Jackson's heart thudded in his chest as he realized she wasn't asking him to just sit there. She was asking him to fight. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice sharp with panic. Sarya shot him a quick glance, her eyes fierce. "You handle the evasive maneuvers. I'll take care of the weapons." Without waiting for an answer, she started flipping switches, and Jackson quickly understood what she meant. The ship's controls flickered and a secondary console slid into view. Weapons, defensive systems. "You've got this?" he asked, glancing between the controls and Sarya, who was already focused on the incoming ship, her fingers flying over the buttons. "I've got it," she replied firmly. "Just make sure we don't get blown up before I can get a shot in." Jackson swallowed, his hands trembling as he took the helm, guiding the ship through a series of aggressive loops and rolls to avoid the incoming fire. His mind raced as he concentrated on the controls, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Just like a video game," he muttered under his breath, though he wasn't sure if that was supposed to be comforting or not. He barely registered the intense energy blasts passing by, too focused on staying one step ahead of the pursuing ship. Each move felt like an eternity, but slowly, the incoming fire started to lessen. Sarya's voice cut through the tension. "Hold steady. Now." She slammed a series of buttons and suddenly the ship's forward cannons erupted with a powerful burst of energy, striking the enemy ship dead center. The impact sent shockwaves through space, and the pursuing vessel jerked violently, spiraling into a cloud of debris. Jackson exhaled, his chest heaving with relief. Did we get them? Sarya's gaze remained fixed on the remaining ships in the distance. For now. But they'll send more, they always do. Before Jackson could respond, the comms panel flickered to life, and a distorted voice crackled through the static. This is your last warning. Surrender now and we may spare your lives. Jackson's eyes widened, his grip tightening on the controls. He had no intention of surrendering, but it was clear that this fight wasn't over. Not happening, Sarya said coolly, her hands still steady on the weapons console. We're not going down without a fight. Jackson glanced at her, feeling a rush of admiration. He wasn't sure what she'd been through in her past, but in this moment, she was the only reason they were still alive. As the enemy ship regrouped, Sarya turned her attention to the next phase of their plan. Get us to the jump gate. We're going to need it. Jackson didn't hesitate. He slammed the throttle forward, the ship lurching as they shot toward the nearby gate. Whatever awaited. Them on the other side, he wasn't sure. But there was no turning back now. The next chapter of their fight had just begun. The jump gate loomed ahead, a swirling vortex of light and energy, its surface shimmering like liquid metal. Jackson's heart pounded in his chest as the ship barreled toward it, the rushing sound of the engines the only thing he could hear over the deafening silence in the cockpit. The enemy ships weren't far behind. They were closing in fast, and Jackson could feel the tension in the air, thick as a storm cloud ready to burst. Come on, Jackson muttered, his hands gripping the controls as the jump gate's event horizon grew larger, consuming everything in its path. He didn't know what awaited them on the other side, but there was no time to think about that now. They had to make it through. Sarya's eyes flicked from the screens to the viewport, her expression grim. We don't have much time, she said, her voice a low growl. They'll be right on us. Jackson gritted his teeth. I'm pushing it to the limit. With a sudden burst of speed, Jackson shoved the throttle forward, the ship surging forward, the engines straining under. The pressure, the jump gate's energy field crackled as they neared it, the air around them seeming to warp in anticipation. Then, a series of explosions rocked the ship, the entire hull shuddering under the impact. Jackson's heart skipped a beat as alarms blared around him. The enemy ships had found them. They were too close, too damn close. Shit. Jackson cursed, frantically trying to regain control as the ship was jolted once more, the warning lights flashing on every console. I can't keep it steady. Sarya's hand shot out, her fingers pressing against the panel with precision. I've got this, she said, her voice calm in the face of the chaos. She activated a series of shields and countermeasures, buying them just enough time to make the final push. We're almost there, Jackson said, his voice tight with desperation. The jump gate was mere seconds away now, but the enemy ships were relentless. He could see their weapons charging, energy crackling in the air, ready to strike. Just as the first blast from the pursuing ships was about to hit, Sarya tapped the console one more time, activating the ship's final emergency thrusters. The lights flickered once as they passed a large security panel, and for a moment Jackson thought he saw a figure darting through the shadows. His heart skipped a beat. Was it another agent? One of the armored figures? Stay close, Sarya muttered, her voice low and fierce as she glanced over her shoulder. We don't have time for distractions. Jackson's pulse quickened as they rounded another corner, and then, there it was, the docking bay. A massive chamber filled with sleek metallic ships that gleamed under the dim lighting. Their escape was in sight, but so was the danger. The armored figure had to be close. Just as Sarya reached the door to the docking bay, it slid open with a hiss, revealing the empty expanse beyond. The ship she had been talking about, a sleek, angular vessel, sat waiting for them, its engines softly pulsing with energy. Jackson's breath caught in his throat. It looked like something out of a dream, or a nightmare, depending on how you looked at it. Get in, now, Sarya urged, her voice sharp. We don't have time to waste. But Jackson hesitated for a split second, his eyes scanning the room. The eerie silence was deafening. There was no sign of the armored figure, no sound of pursuit. It felt almost too quiet. He could feel it. The danger hanging in the air, the sense of being watched. "Sarya," he said, his voice low but insistent. "Something's not right." Before Sarya could respond, a loud clatter echoed from behind them, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy boots. Jackson's head whipped, around just in time to see a pair of figures step into view, their figures outlined by the dim light from the hallway. 2 more armored agents blocking their only exit. "Thought you could escape?" one of them sneered, their voice distorted by the modulator in their helmet. "You're not going anywhere." Sarya's body went tense, her stance shifting into one, readiness. "Get to the ship, I'll hold them off." Jackson's heart raced. "No, we fight together." Sarya shot him a look, one that told him they didn't have the luxury of fighting. Not yet, at least. She pushed him toward the ship, her eyes burning with urgency. "Go, Jackson, now!" The 2 agents stepped forward, their movements calculated and purposeful. One of them raised a weapon, a sleek, pulsating rifle that hummed with dangerous energy. The other advanced, their posture predatory, as if they had all the time in the world. Jackson hesitated for only a moment longer. Then he sprinted for the ship, his legs pumping hard as he reached the vessel's open hatch. He could hear Sarya's voice behind him, her words barely audible over the pounding of his heart. "Go, go, go!" He didn't look back, though every instinct in him screamed to do so. The ship's door slammed shut with a resounding thud just as he dove into the cockpit, the control panel lighting up in front of him like a beacon of hope. Panic surged in his chest. He didn't know how to fly this thing. Didn't know how to pilot anything like it. But there was no time to hesitate. His fingers flew over the controls, desperate to make sense of the alien technology in front of him. With a loud whine, the engines roared to life, sending a shockwave through the ship. He glanced over his shoulder at Sarya, who had already started working on the secondary controls, her face set with fierce determination. "Get us off the ground," she ordered, her voice unwavering. "I'm trying," Jackson muttered, his fingers pressing random buttons as panic continued to claw at him. But slowly, agonizingly, the ship began to rise, the soft hum of the engines growing louder, vibrating through his bones. Behind them, the agents closed in. Jackson could hear the thrum of their weapons charging, and a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He had no idea how to outrun them, how to escape this nightmare. But he couldn't let them stop him, not now. The ship lurched forward, and Jackson pulled back on the throttle, sending it shooting through the docking bay's opening. The pressure in his chest intensified as the ship's speed increased, the world outside the viewport blurring into streaks of light. He could hear the faint echo of gunfire from behind them, but it was too late. They were out of range, shooting into the empty air as they ascended toward the stars. He was free, at least for now. "Where do we go now?" Jackson gasped, still gripping the controls like his life depended on it. Sarya's gaze was fixed on the stars ahead, her expression unreadable. "We get to the coordinates I gave you. From there, we find the answers, and we figure out how to stop them." Jackson's heart pounded in his chest, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he allowed himself to breathe. They were alive. For now, that was enough. As the ship soared into the darkness of space, Jackson's mind raced with questions. Who were the agents? What was the program really after? And what did Sarya mean by stop them? The ship lurched forward with a sudden burst of speed, propelling them straight into the heart of the jump gate. For a moment, everything was pure white light. The ship shook violently, and Jackson's vision blurred. His whole body felt like it was being torn apart, pulled in 100 different directions at once. He could hear the groaning of the ship's frame as it fought to stay intact, the energy of the gate's passage pushing them through dimensions. Then, with a violent shudder, the world snapped back into focus. The jump gate spit them out into strange, unfamiliar star system, a sea of swirling nebulae and distant, uncharted planets stretching out before them. The ship fell into a steady orbit around a nearby moon, its thrusters humming softly as the immediate threat of the pursuing fleet faded into the distance. For a moment, Jackson could only stare at the view, his chest rising and falling with the deep breaths he'd been holding in. He had no idea where they were, but it didn't matter. They were alive. "Are we clear?" Jackson asked, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Sarya took a deep breath and checked the scanners. "For now, but this is just the beginning." Jackson let out a long sigh, running a hand through his hair. "We need a plan. We can't keep running forever." Sarya turned to him, her gaze steady and resolute. "We don't need to run, we need to fight, and we're going to take them down." Jackson felt a cold chill at the intensity in her voice. It was more than just survival now. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. "What do we do next?" he asked, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. Sarya's lips curled into a slight smile, but there was no warmth in it. "We find out who's behind the program, and then we burn their empire to the ground." Jackson swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. He had signed up for a fight, but he hadn't known it would be this much. The stakes were higher than he could have imagined. They weren't just fighting for their lives anymore. They were fighting to expose a truth so dangerous it could tear everything apart. "Are we sure we're ready for this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarya's eyes hardened. "I've been ready for this my entire life." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Jackson didn't know what he had expected, but he wasn't sure if he was prepared for what lay ahead. A rebellion, a war, against an empire that had held the galaxy in its grip for centuries. It was bigger than anything he could have imagined. But he wasn't alone. And with Sarya by his side, he felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. "We're not backing down," Sarya said, her voice unwavering. "Not now, not ever." Jackson nodded, his resolve solidifying. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The stars outside the ship seemed to burn a little brighter, the darkness of space just a little less imposing. For the first time since all of this started, Jackson felt like they had a fighting chance. But there was still so much they didn't know. So much that remained hidden in the depths of the universe. And as the ship drifted further into the unknown, Jackson knew that the fight was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning.